Thunderstorms sweeping through the southeastern U.S. into Florida. Snow continues in the northern plains, and a powerful weather system approaches the coast of California. Central pressures this morning down to 956 millibars, the equivalent of a Category 3 hurricane. As usual, we start with the surface chart before heading into the details. This has shown us a vast area of cold air advection flowing into the Midwest and the southern U.S. Temperatures down to the 20s and 30s, and as we go further down south, 40s and 50s. Out ahead of that front, we've got a prefrontal squall line from Virginia down into the Tallahassee and Gulf Coast area. The real cold front crossing the Appalachians at this hour, and we've had warm air advection up the East Coast, temperatures close to 60 degrees this afternoon, and just north of this front, an area of fog from New York to Boston. And as we get that increased lift ahead of this frontal system, we're going to start seeing some freezing precipitation developing in northern New York and Vermont. Further out to the west, snow continues to fall around the Minneapolis area, 10 inches of snow through 6 a.m. out in the Twin Cities area. Going further west, some relatively dry weather in the Rockies, and then there's our big weather system out in the Pacific. Central pressure at the time of this map down around 960 millibars, and that strong gradient with southerly winds approaching the California and Oregon coast. The triple point extending from just west of San Francisco to just south of Los Angeles. So the warm sector located right there, the overrunning isentropic lift out in this region, and as we go further to the west, we get into some more unstable air, and that tends to be more convective in nature. And we'll take a sneak peek at this with AWIPS, which is the tool used by the National Weather Service offices. So you're looking at the same thing the forecasters are looking at. What we have here is the 850 millibar chart, the heights, which is kind of like pressure, the wind field at 850 millibars, that's up at 5,000 feet. And also we have the instability with these green and red colors. I've chosen to use the lapse rate from 850 to 500 millibars. That's about 5,000 to 18,000 feet. And that's where most of the important lift is taking place in the mid-levels of the atmosphere there. So as we go forward, this is going to be this morning. If you want to follow along, you can look in the lower right-hand corner. That shows the UTC date and time. And you can see these yellows approaching the California coast, showing the increase in instability. And we're up to about 3 or 4 p.m., I think that's 4 p.m. on the west coast. A band of stronger instability approaching Northern California there and coming on shore about, I guess it's going to be about 7 or 8 p.m. And that'll sweep through much of California overnight. This could actually produce some thunderstorms along the coast and even some water spouts. And of course, this will be associated with the main cold front coming on shore, and there will still be some convection in the wake of the front, but it will be a little bit weaker in nature. And you can see the rest of that instability coming into Central California tomorrow morning and down into Southern California for tomorrow. And we'll look at that in a little bit with some more charts, but let's head up to Canada and Alaska. Some rather quiet weather. Don't have a big high pressure up there driving cold air south. Instead, just kind of a quiet southerly flow onshore component, producing some precip there in the coastal areas of Alaska. And inland, temperatures right around minus 10 to 10 above, which is typical for this time of year. In the Canadian Arctic today, temperatures also fairly close to typical values. The coldest that I'm seeing is going to be, looks like minus 29. Not sure what station that is. Probably Go Haven. And heading back into Quebec, a polar high-pressure area sweeping southeast, driving some of that cold air into the Maritimes, as well into New York, which is helping to augment that icy precip we're expecting a little bit later. And I think that just about rounds us out for the surface analysis. And we'll take a very quick look at the upper air patterns. This is the jet stream level, 300 millibars, showing the supply of Pacific air running right into the west coast area. And you just basically look at that band, see where it's coming on shore, and that tells you where things are going downhill. So we're going to see that continue into California for at least a couple days. So we're up to Friday here, another pulse of energy coming into Oregon, and another wave heading into California for Sunday morning. And the fun just keeps on continuing. There's another strong wave coming in for Tuesday, and a few more ripples coming inland, another big one for next Friday, and by the time we get to January 14th, still looking at considerable Pacific energy offshore. That could be heading more towards Oregon and Washington. Not too sure yet, but generally when we see these strong jet stream winds on the back of a ridge, as shown here, that tends to build the ridge a little bit. So that could direct a lot of that energy up in the Pacific Northwest as that approaches the coast. All right, I know a lot of you are interested in that big monster storm off California. Here we've got the sea level pressure from the GFS model starting out at 12Z, so that's going to be 4 in the morning this morning. And we've got 957 millibars in that center, very wound up there. And as we go into this evening, approaching the coast, but you can see it filling a little bit, up to 959 millibars, but strong gradients working into the Fort Bragg area, up to Arcata and Eureka. And even on the backside, a strong gradient coming in from the northwest. So that's going to be a hazardous area for marine ship traffic. And then by midnight, you can see this band of yellow and green, and that corresponds to precipitation. This is a precip overlay here. So heavy rains coming into California. Let me run that back so you can see that working inland. Already got a setup there with showers. We know that at the Sour, also showers down there in Los Angeles, but it will get heavier going into tonight. And that will spread into the Bay Area towards midnight. And with that, some strong winds working into Northern California. There's tomorrow morning. Let me get that out of the way. And then tomorrow afternoon. And then we should start seeing things improve tomorrow evening as the energy tracks into the Great Basin area and the Rockies. But out to the west, another weather system. And to show you how we find the fronts, we're looking at the 1,000 through 700 millibar thickness. And that basically corresponds to the isotherms in the lower half of the atmosphere. So if we draw the fronts, that's going to be a cold front right there. The warm front up to the north. So this is a little bit further north than the previous system. So we're looking at tomorrow evening there. And that'll head towards Oregon and California. Mostly as a cold front. That's going to be it right there. And the occlusion extending up north. So we go up to Friday afternoon. The tail end developing another wave. So that's going to be a warm front with a cold front like that. And if you refer back to weather textbooks, that's going to be a developing wave. So that is what's going to bear watching. Central pressure on that about 1005 millibars. And it undergoes some deepening there. Very slight. And here we're down to about 1001 millibars in the center. This is going to be Saturday morning. And that comes on shore. We've kind of lost definition, but it is bringing some temperamental weather into the Bay Area north towards Eureka. And there's another weather system. So cold front about like that. Warm front there linking back into the old system and the occlusion extending up north. So yeah, that's typical synoptic scale analysis, very useful on the West Coast. And you can link that back into the next system. We're up to Sunday, and I'm not going to go through all of these charts, but I'll just kind of flip through, and you can watch the weather coming inland. Looks like things go really downhill for Monday night into Tuesday. One low, one trough, one after another. Just taking a battering there, but California really does need some rain because they've been undergoing a long deficit. And this is very important as we head into summer. And that's only 5 months away before things really start heating up. Okay, the rest of you who are not in California, you're probably wondering, what about my area? Let's take a look at that, look at the national picture. We're looking at sea level pressure in black. We're looking at 1,000 through 700 millibar thickness in red. And we're looking at precipitable water. Very valuable in showing how much moisture supply we have. So starting out on the west coast, we can definitely see that cold front and the warm front. This is going to be 4 in the morning this morning, so that's where we're starting out with this model run. And in the eastern U.S., we can also pick out a front that's going to be ahead of that gradient, kind of like that, and a warm front maybe a little further north up in that area, and then the rest of it's going to be an occlusion. So that's starting out this morning. There's where we're at this evening, probably around the time most of you are watching this. Cold front starting to clear the east coast, the occluded front coming back around into the Great Lakes, and the warm front lifting up into around Long Island and Cape Cod. There's that thermal gradient up to the north supporting that overrunning. And there's that ice accumulation forecast from the Weather Service in Burlington. Most of that heavy ice expected in the northern tier counties of New York, but some of it also expected around Burlington. That'll be generally below a quarter inch. But there could be some isolated power outages, and of course we could see some downed tree limbs. In the central U.S., you may think that there's nothing to look at, but look closer. We can see a cold pool right here that's indicating the core of the coldest air wrapping around the west side of that low around the Twin Cities, and also a strong thermal gradient coming into Kentucky, Tennessee, down into Texas. But as we go further south, we lose the strong winds, and there's not as much advection to push on that gradient. So this is kind of indeterminate. And we're looking for the next approaching weather system from the west. It could pull that gradient together and result in frontogenesis. So let's take that forward and see what happens. Going into tomorrow, by the time we get up to the evening hours, it's going to look kind of like this. You can see troughing in eastern New Mexico, return flow setting up in Texas, and a thermal gradient. So depending on how much lift is coming in from the west, that could tap that gradient, and that's what we need essentially to get a frontal system going. The remainder of that frontal system heads off the east coast tomorrow night, warm front south of the Canadian Maritimes, and the occlusion coming around back into Lake Huron. All right, so our California system is moving inland. You can see the strong thermal gradient right there south of Yuma. So that's going to be the cold front making its way into Arizona, and kind of lost that warm front. I would expect it's probably somewhere in this area. But let's see what happens when it crosses over into New Mexico and Texas. Yeah, there it is. Pressure falls. And the moisture comes out of the Gulf, flowing into Texas and Oklahoma. And we get our next frontal system coming together. That's about how it's going to look on Friday night. And that'll move eastward. Looks like at this point the warm front is about like that, the cold front south, and the occlusion like that. And of course, out to the west, another frontal system making its way inland. So we'll go forward into the beginning of next week. We're not going to go through all of the forecast charts, but we'll give you an idea of what's going to happen. A stagnant boundary there along the Gulf Coast. In California, things going downhill once again. There's an atmospheric river coming into Central California for early Monday. And let's see, the next big change in the inland area of the U.S. is going to be this high coming in 1035 millibars, pushing cold air into the southeastern and south central U.S. But on the other side of that ridge, which is located right here, the return flow setting up and getting that warm air advection going once again. All right, so that's probably a good place to stop. That's going to be about a week from now. Not a whole lot of change, really. Just kind of a sequence of migratory systems coming across the U.S. and some cold air flowing down into parts of the central and eastern U.S. All right, anytime we have significant weather coming into the west coast, we need to look at those IVT values. That gives us an idea how bad our precip and flooding problems will be. IVT is integrated vapor transport, and it's one of the best measures we have for that type of hazard. And what we see here is going into this evening and tonight, values up to about 1,000, maybe about 1,200. That's going to be definitely in the strong category, focused mostly on northwestern California. But some of it will work its way down the coast, values up to about 700 or 800. And by later tonight into tomorrow, those values taper down into the 500, 400, and 300 range, which gets us progressively into the weaker categories. So there will be that strong surge of precip going into tonight, and then the precip rates will gradually go down through the day tomorrow. But you can see this train of additional storms lined up, and I'll just take you through that. The next system heading mostly into Oregon for the 6th and 7th. Another wave heading into California there. And there's our next big shot for the 8th and 9th. And that's got values very similar to what we have today, but the central cyclone not quite as well developed. So wind hazards will be a little bit weaker. And we continue the track just one after the other. And hopefully we'll get those reservoirs filled without any catastrophic damage. At least that's what I'm hoping there. And looking at the Storm Prediction Center advisory, slight risk from North Carolina down to Florida. But you can see that yesterday we did have some scattered severe weather. We had 7 tornadoes reported in central Illinois, 2 in Mississippi, and 2 in Georgia. And back on Monday, we had some severe weather from the same system. This example of a tornado was taken in central Arkansas. You can see the updraft base right here, the tornado off the left side of the screen. This is taken by a surveillance camera at Jesseville High School near Hot Springs. And I think we are looking to possibly to the northwest. But there you can see the lower bases, the frames jump, and there's the main tornado coming across the football field. Pretty spectacular there. It looks like you can see the light poles breaking as that moves by. So quite an interesting clip there. I'm not sure who the credit goes to, probably the high school there at Garland County. And let's take a look at the radar of that event, shall we? It's like a broad area of somewhat disorganized precip, but one little cell out ahead of the line. And I've got a dot right there. That's where Jesseville High School is. So we'll zoom in on that. And the storm looks deceptively weak, but as we go forward in time, this is going to be about 222. The tornado is at 238. You can see it taking on kind of a curled structure, a comma shape there. And this is right around the time that tornado hit. You can see the tip of that curl right there. So we'll zoom in. Let me get some of the streets out of the way. All right, so there's the velocity. We'll run that back a few minutes, and kind of a broad circulation there. You can see that tightening up as it approaches Jesseville, and at the time of the tornado, a very small pixel there of 38 in, the radar site being located out that way. And just not very tight circulation. That's very difficult to detect there. Spectrum width, however, did show kind of a strong peak there. Not before, but at the time of the tornado it was showing up. So that could be an indicator of debris being lofted. And let me go back to that frame right there. Look at the reflectivity. And there's the one after the tornado event. And by that time they put out the warning. I'm not so sure that they had much lead time on this, but it was a very difficult, fast-breaking situation, so I'm not going to worry about that too much. And I think the intensity, the preliminary intensity on that was EF1. Let's take one last look at California there. This is the 18Z data showing southeasterly flow through the San Joaquin Valley, and out there at Tonopah, temperatures 34 with snow coming down. So going to this evening, we run the animation forward. can see the bands of model-generated precip approaching the coast. Don't have any data out in the Pacific because the high-resolution rapid refresh does not go that far. However, yeah, there's the bands working onshore right around 4 to 5 p.m. Pacific time and moving right on in across the coastal range into the Bay Area. And, of course, that will come with the cold front. And still, with that convective instability behind the cold front, we'll continue to get some showers in the wake of the system. And you can see the wind plots there, some 30-knot values showing up in the valleys of California. And there's a look at those forecast gusts from the Weather Service in Eureka, 60 to 70 miles an hour up and down the coast, and some fairly stout winds inland as well. In closing, I want to ask all of you to leave a comment here on YouTube, letting me know where you are. That gives me some idea of where I should be focusing on, where our viewers are. That's very important to me, so please leave a comment letting me know where you're located. And if you don't want to say where you are, just tell me what area you want to look at or what you want to see and what you think of these charts. Also, I want to thank our new Patreon supporter, Milo Tour, our first one of 2023. Thank you very much, Milo, for supporting the program. We'll see you back here on Friday. Hope you have a great Wednesday evening and Thursday, and we'll see you in a couple days. Take care. Bye-bye.